Well, Agency Enlightened is here, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoy this module as much as I enjoyed making it for you and delivering it to you today for free. Oh my God, for free from my heart and from the heart of all of humanity. Enjoy and know that I am no longer in business. I've sold pretty much all my equity in Better AMS. I'm now an inactive partner who holds a minor stake, and that is official, signed on the dot. Wow, 7 or 8 years of running and that thing and starting it, and I am out, ladies and gents. It feels fantastic, and I pray that all of you who are going on this journey are served well by the content in Agency Enlightened, and that it helps you reach a point where you have financial freedom and that you can live in the middle of the jungle and hold this tripod thingy with a straw hat and talk about whatever you want to talk about, okay? So enjoy this module, and know also that there's a link in the description for accessing the resources and the action items that you need to, complete whatever the module is. It's all there, it's all free. And know that if you want to support the nonprofit that I'm starting called Satori, you can go in the link in the description and you'll be able to opt in to be notified when the Satori podcast goes live, which is going to be probably in a matter of 2 or 3 months or something like this. Real quick, before the module begins, you can just fast forward and skip this intro because it's going to be on the every single module intro if you don't want to know this. But Satori is a nonprofit dedicated or devoted to helping mankind realize the self by sharing God's word. So that's what I want to do, and that seems to be where all my energy is going these days. If that sounds interesting to you, you can go and check it out and drop your little email in the landing page thing, okay? Thank Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, Mary, and Mother Teresa, and all the great sages and avatars that walked on this earth. May it be so that all of what is spoken out of Satori is heard and understood by all of mankind, and that it is felt as the gift that it is from my heart, okay? Mwah! I love you all very much.
Ladies and gents, welcome to the Systems Thinking module. My name is Taylor Benfield, and I'm going to walk you through this module. I'm so excited. By far, one of my favorite modules that we've done thus far. So let's get straight into it. The goal of this module is really to give you the ability to always know what is the most important thing that you should be working on in your agency to take it to the next level. And how do you go about approaching, working on that thing and building a system or improving a system. So some of this information was covered in previous modules, but 90% of it is new. We're just bringing back some core concepts. Now, here's what we're going to cover: understanding systems, agency systems, metrics, improving systems, and building systems. So, what is a system? This is a slide you may be familiar with. Again, just a reminder, a system is a network of interdependent components which work together to achieve the goal of a system. Interdependent just means dependent on each other, 2 or more things, people or things. And a component is like a part or element of a larger whole. And a system is really made of elements, interconnections, and a function or purpose. Function meaning like, a machine has a function, or if it was like a people-oriented system, it would be a purpose. So really those 2 words mean the same thing. And systems, as we know, are everywhere. We have digestive systems, respiratory systems, solar systems, political systems, financial systems. We live in a universe that is like made of systems. Everywhere you look, everything is part of a system, and there's subsystems within it, and it's just this infinite, beautiful, like giant system. And here's some quick terminology that is important as we go through this module. Again, you already know what a system is. The throughput is the rate at which a system achieves its goal. Bottleneck, this is the component within the system that becomes the largest constraint on the throughput. And the goal is simply the purpose or function of a system. So the biggest bottleneck, it is basically always the best thing and most important thing that you should be working on. And this is where this concept of an asymmetric action is made. And bottlenecks, asymmetric actions, they're the same thing in my mind. And you should think of it as the same thing, because the biggest bottleneck is always the thing that, if fixed, will produce the greatest results for improving the system or your agency, which is a system, right? Now, an asymmetric action is simply the action that if you take, it requires the least input and the greatest output, right? And it's a balance between those two things. And the biggest bottleneck is always the asymmetric action. The asymmetric action is always the biggest bottleneck. Because, as you know from systems thinking, which we're going to go further into, a system, the output, the throughput, it cannot be increased unless the biggest bottleneck is dealt with. So, you may hear me say asymmetric action in the future as well. Now let's watch this quick video by a legendary systems thinker, and then we'll come back to the slides.
System is a whole that contains two or more parts, each of which can affect the properties or behavior of the whole. For example, you are a system, a biological system called an organism, and you have parts like your heart, stomach, lungs, pancreas, and so on, each of which can affect your properties and your behavior. The second requirement of the parts of a system is that none of them has an independent effect on the whole. How any part affects the whole depends on what other parts are doing. So the way your heart affects you depends on the behavior of the lungs, the brain, and so on. The parts are all interconnected. Between any two parts of a system, there's a direct or an indirect path. And finally, if you group the parts of a system into subgroups, no matter how you subgroup them, each subgroup will have an effect on the properties and the behavior of the whole, and none will have an independent effect. And therefore, you can summarize those three characteristics of a system into a simple statement: a system is a whole that cannot be divided into independent parts. Now, this has a number of consequences which are not apparent but are incredibly important. The first is the essential properties of any system derive out of how its parts interact, not on how they act taken separately. And therefore, the defining properties of any system are properties of the whole, which none of its parts have. For example, an automobile is a mechanical system, and its essential property is its ability to carry you from one place to another. But no part of it can do that. There's no part of an automobile, its motor, its body, its seats, that can carry you from one place to another. It's only the automobile taken as a whole. Your essential property is life. There's no part of you which separately lives. Life is a property of the whole. And therefore, when the whole is disassembled, it loses its essential properties, and so do all of its parts. If we were to bring an automobile into this room and disassemble it, but retain every part in the room, we would not have an automobile. What you have is a collection of the parts, because the automobile is the product of the interaction of its parts, not the sum of the parts taken separately.
So, that was Dr. Russell Ackoff, if you're not familiar with him. He is probably one of the greatest systems thinkers ever. I highly recommend you go deep into some of his stuff on YouTube. But let's now kind of look at what you just heard him talk about and apply this to a system, which let's just call it a car. So a car, the system purpose is primarily transportation. And the elements, I mean, let's just list a few. The chassis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the wheels, the seats, the engine, seat belts. Those are some of the elements within the car. And again, the defining properties of any system are properties of the whole, which none of its parts have. So, for example, an automobile. This is a mechanical system, and its essential property is to carry you from like point A to point B. But there's no single part of this car that can do that. Transportation is a property of the whole. And therefore, when you disassemble the whole, you lose the essential property or essential properties. And so all of its parts lose the essential property. If we were to bring an automobile like this car, again, in this room, and disassemble it, but retain every part in the room, we wouldn't have an automobile. What we would have is a collection of parts, because the automobile is the product of the interaction of the parts, not the sum of the parts taken separately. That was basically what he had stated in that video. And this is a really powerful thing to understand, because when we look at agency systems, and we look at your agency, or any agency, One of the system purposes, not all the time, but one of the most common system purposes is to produce profit. And the elements are marketing, sales, operations, HR, finance, legal, these common elements. And we have also the foundation, which is product market fit, service market fit. And the defining properties of any system are, again, properties of the whole, which none of its parts have. So profit is a property of the whole. No individual part within the business can create profit. If you look at like just operations, if you remove all the other parts, you wouldn't be able to produce profit. You need to get clients. You need to get leads. You need to close those leads and turn them into clients. You need to have people on your team and manage those people. You need to have an actual corporation set up legally. You need to have accounting done. You need to file taxes, all these things. If you just remove finance or legal, I mean, you definitely don't have a business, right? You can't produce any profit because you don't have a corporation. You won't be able to open a bank account, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be illegal. So this is kind of a nice concept to understand, and we'll get into why it's important here. But it goes deeper. So it's important to note that systems thinking is somewhat of an infinite game in which there is infinite systems within systems. So it's important not to get lost in all of it. But this is a good representation of the overall business system, right? Your agency and the major subsystems within it, which are actually the sectors of agency Enlightened because they're the major parts or components, subsystems of your agency. And eventually we reach a subsystem in which we get to processes, which aren't systems, and we'll explain the difference between systems and processes here in a later point. In this case, the circle represents processes. So systems theory, this is basically how a system works. It's extremely simple. We have inputs, which if we looked like at a very zoomed out system, such as the agency, the inputs of any agency or business is generally, marketing, sales, operation, HR, finance, legal. And when you put all these, inputs and you go to market to offer a service or product, it transforms into something that can produce revenue and profit, right? And so then once you actually launch and you go to market, you start getting feedback. And say, for example, you launch an agency and you can't get any clients. Well, that's feedback that something needs to change within the system. Or let's say you're able to get clients and produce a good result for them, but the agency isn't yet profitable. Again, that's just feedback that you need to change some inputs within the machine to basically optimize it to be profitable, assuming you want it to be profitable. And so feedback is really, really important, and any system has feedback. So let's review some actual examples because this is kind of abstract. So this is basically, imagine you ran like a business that created wood tables. You have a woodworking business and you make tables. This is a very simple business. Your inputs is really just wood, raw materials like wood. And those materials transform into tables. So the output is a table. And possibly you sell the table, right? And let's just say a customer complains and says, yeah, it's just really not smooth enough. I'm getting like slivers in my hands or my arms when I touch the table. And so that's important feedback. People are going to stop buying your product, or they're not going to buy your product at all if they look at it and they like it, but they touch it and they get slivers in their fingers. And so to basically take that feedback and improve your business, you should smoothen out the tables. Pretty straightforward. And again, just to go a step further, there's an environment that this business lives in. This business could easily die if all the wood in the world somehow just disappeared. Or let's say you live in a particular region of the world and you rely on a particular region to supply wood for your business, and all of a sudden that region, there's a forest fire and you can't get access to wood, and now you can't produce tables, etc. So, this is environmental things and how they impact the business. Or if you can't find, the right power tools that you need to create the tables, or the electricity goes out, and because there's no electricity, you can't use your tools, etc. There's so many different environmental factors that can impact your business positively or negatively. Now let's look at the actual agency as a system and the various different subsystems within it and go a few layers deep. So we're going to look at the agency system, and then we're going to drill into a marketing system, and then drill down a little bit further into an inbound marketing system. to kind of show you the various different subsystems within an overall system. So this is an agency system, right? We have inputs, foundation, marketing, sales, operations, HR, finance. This is kind of one of the most macro views. Let's just assume one of the outputs is profit. There's obviously many other outputs, but profit's one of the core ones. And the environment is, let's say, your service offering, your ICP, the ideal client profile you're going after, the market you're in, the niche you're in, the planet Earth, the planet that you're on. Something like a pandemic happening can be detrimental to your agency. There's infinite things, right? The environment is constantly impacting your agency, the system, right? Almost everybody's aware of that now with the whole pandemic thing going on, because there was many businesses that were crushed by it. And that's an environmental factor that impacted the system greatly, right? Now let's go a little bit deeper. So let's look at just the marketing system. So again, just coming back here, there was an input in the agency system that was marketing, and now we're going to drill into that input, because marketing is really a subsystem of the overall system. You don't do marketing, it's a system. And then so when we look at marketing as a system, we have some core inputs here. We have an ideal client profile. We have like a digital footprint, like our website, social profiles on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or wherever that is. And then we have an inbound marketing as well, which is basically a type of marketing system. We could do inbound, we could do outbound, and this is the inputs, and then the output is leads, right? So good marketing should attract quality leads. And the environment is really dependent on where you run your marketing systems. But again, planet Earth is still a part of the environment where we live on Earth. And so there's laws and everything, political systems that can affect it. But this goes a little bit deeper to where, if you're doing primarily, content marketing on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, then your marketing system is dependent on those platforms. And that's an environment in itself. And so then there's like market saturation, where markets get more competitive and they go from like blue oceans to red oceans. That affects how you should be marketing to clients. And market sophistication, this is a concept of like, how sophisticated is the market that you're going after? Are they well aware of the service that you're offering and how it can benefit them? Are they not at all aware of it? These are things that can impact how you market to your people, and that change over time due to the environment. Service offering, etc. So this is the marketing system. Now let's go a little bit further. Let's go into the inbound marketing system, which again, this was an input here. So we're drilling now from a subsystem into a subsystem. And now if we look at the inputs, what do you notice? We have writing content, posting on LinkedIn, engaging, prospecting, repeating the above daily. These are the inputs, and the outputs again is leads. Okay. And the environment is very similar to the previous one that we looked at. The core difference here is that this is actually a process. Writing content, although you could consider it a system, we've drilled down far enough into the subsystem that we've reached something that isn't necessarily a system. Like, we can do writing content, we can do posting on LinkedIn, you do engaging on LinkedIn. Like, that is something that you can actually do. Notice how almost all of these inputs start with a verb: writing, posting, engaging, connecting. I think it's a verb. And this is an action, right? So it's something that we do. And processes are things that you do. Systems aren't necessarily things that you do. Inbound marketing is not something that you can do. Therefore, it's a system, because there's so many different processes within it that need to be done for it to be, considered inbound marketing. And so when we look at systems versus processes, a system, again, a network of interdependent components coherently organized to achieve something. And process is really the activities you do in order to make any given system work most efficiently, or just in general work, right? And so it's things that you do. Now, systems versus processes, again, if we look at what we just went through, we have the agency system, marketing system, and only once we get to the inputs of the inbound marketing system do we see processes. You could consider writing content a system, and you could break that down further. Posting on LinkedIn, again, you could also consider that a system. You could consider engaging on LinkedIn a system. This is where, systems thinking is somewhat subjective in how the person who's building the system or looking at the system perceives it. In this case, for us, writing content is simple enough to where I'm not going to try to break that down further and consider that a system and try to teach somebody like how to put words together and formulate a subject. Writing content's pretty straightforward. There are some different tactics or ways you can write different types of content, but it's straightforward enough to where I'm not going to try to go drill down further. Same thing with posting on LinkedIn or engaging on LinkedIn with people or connecting with prospects on LinkedIn that could be ideal clients. Okay, so the next most important thing to understand is that systems, it's non-linear. It's not a linear fashion Newtonian paradigm. So like it may appear that when you're looking at all the various different subsystems within the overall system of your business, foundation, marketing, sales, operations, HR, it looks like they work in a Newtonian, linear fashion where you choose a market and you choose a service offering, and then you formulate some marketing, and then you get a lead, and then you have to close the lead, and then you start doing service work, and then you have to hire people eventually, and you also need to get your finance and legal together in your corporation, all this. But it doesn't work in this linear fashion. This is just how we understand it, quite simply. But a good example of how this is not linear, and we'll get to this in a second, is if you look at like the human body, it's not like there's parts of the body that are more important. It's not like it starts with your lungs and then your heart activates and then like your muscular system starts activating, like, and then your nervous system starts activating. No, they're all functioning like rapidly at the same time, right? And so it's non-linear, and it looks like this. It's just all of these different elements and components, they interconnect. And so let's say that you hired a bad salesperson, or you hired a salesperson, but you just had no training for them and expected them to close some deals. And let's say they closed some deals, but they closed some really poor deals at much lower retainers than you would typically have signed. And the quality of the brand or the client that they closed is just very non-ideal relative to your ideal client. Well, that's really going to impact operations. And why is that going to impact operations? Because now the team in operations is going to have to service a client that's not ideal. They're going to have an unhappy client. Unhappy clients are going to cause unhappy people within your company. Unhappy people within your company creates a kind of sort of negative vibe that can cause people to leave. And then also you're signing a non-ideal clients that are likely to churn. They're lower retainers, so your profit margins may go down. All sorts of things start happening if like one component just starts performing poorly, right? And so everything is interconnected. And that's what's so important to understand about systems thinking, is that there's no linear fashion, and it's like foundation or marketing only affects sales and sales only affects operations. That's not how it works. They all affect each other. Okay? So it's also important to understand that there's an environment that these things live in, and we can't forget that. We can't forget how all systems are impacted by the environment. And a good example is, if you entered a blue ocean market and over time it becomes red ocean, a lot changes. If it becomes much more competitive, it gets harder to attract leads. It gets harder to close deals at higher retainers. You have to be cognizant of a market shifting and just the world changing and how you pivot to adapt. Okay? So what's the value in all this? Well, if you can't improve a system if you don't understand it. So you can't improve a system if you don't understand it. I think I said that wrong. You can't improve a system if you don't understand it. A lot of people don't actually understand their business as a system. They can't really see it from this lens of like it's a machine and it has different components and subsystems and processes. And so the purpose of understanding and analyzing systems is to improve them. You can't improve a system if you don't understand it, which you should now be able to see how all these things come together to help you better understand how your agency/machine operates. And in doing so, you can now better understand where the biggest bottleneck is. And when you clearly understand the system, you can clearly identify where the biggest bottleneck is. Then you can actually work on the asymmetric action that's going to help you take your agency/system to the next level. So you can see how important all of this is. And for those of you who already know systems thinking and are familiar with a lot of this, sweet, this is just a reminder. But most people aren't aware of this, and I certainly wasn't for many, many years. And it caused a lot of pain and frustration, as it does to probably 95% of business owners. Now let's talk about metrics. This is an amazing conversation. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it, by the legendary Peter Drucker. Revenue and profit. This is something that most business owners, and I say most because there's a lot who don't, this is something that most people actually track. I would hope, at a bare minimum, if you're not tracking anything in your agency, this is the only one thing that you're actually tracking, and on a monthly basis, not once a year, every single month at least. Ideally, it's you do your books daily. But a system, systems, they cannot be improved if they can't be measured. Also, if you're neglecting to measure the performance of a system, you won't know if it's improving. It was actually funny, I was victim to this in the first 2 to 3 years of running the agency. I maybe measured revenue like haphazardly in a Google sheet, and it was never really that accurate. Didn't have an accounting team, didn't do the books properly. And then like finally it would be like 6 months into the year, and I'd be like, oh man, I really need to like measure my revenue. I don't know where I'm at, if I'm like growing, if where the profit's at. I mean, I'd look at the bank account, and I'm like, okay, it looks like it's going up. And it was just such chaos. It was such chaos. I wasn't even measuring the two most fundamental things, and most people actually aren't measuring this, or if they're measuring it, they're not measuring it properly, and they're not measuring it frequently enough for it to be valuable to them. So this is insane if you're not measuring things. You can't improve the system. You don't even know if it's improving if you're not measuring it, at least revenue and profit. But just like how any vehicle has its metrics on the dashboard, such as temperature of the oil, gas in the tank, the speed of the car, along with other things, your business should have something similar. However, most people really don't have anything like this, or it takes them years to start putting, metrics and systems or KPIs in place. So measuring important KPIs is vital for, number one, knowing if you're improving the system, and number two, identifying the biggest bottlenecks at scale. We're going to talk about what at scale means. I say at scale because typically when you're smaller or you're growing very slow, it's not extremely difficult to identify bottlenecks and asymmetric actions. But if you're trying to grow quickly and make the right decisions at rapid scale, then measuring KPIs amongst all the various subsystems within your business becomes very important, because things are changing so quickly, and you need to have a really good pulse on where everything is at, real time almost, or at least daily or weekly. So let's just pause for a moment. Now look at the subsystems below or on the slide and ask yourself, are you measuring any important KPIs within these subsystems? First of all, are you measuring revenue and profit? Most people don't have any measurements for these various different, subsystems. We didn't for a long time, and I'd say our measuring systems are still not as great as they should be, but we're working on them and we're improving them. So let's look at the various different subsystems and what you should be measuring in your business and your agency. And this is what we are measuring currently within Better AMS. I'll tell you which ones we're doing a good job of measuring, which ones we're getting better at. Marketing qualified leads. This is really the only thing and we pretty much just started measuring this. This is not something that we ever really looked at the end of the month. We got 32 leads. No, this is something we didn't do for a long time, 5 years. And so qualified leads is really the only thing we're measuring right now. In the sales sector or subsystem, MRR gained, this is a dollar amount. So if we close 3 clients and those retainers are going to come to an extra, $9,000 to $12,000 per month in MRR, sweet. We'll track that. We'll know that that's the MRR gain for the month. Clients signed. How many clients did we actually sign? That's just a number, right? 2, 3 clients, whatever it is. The close rate, this is not something we actually measure right now, but we should likely be measuring it this year. Close rate is simply, if you do 10 sales calls and you close 2, you have a 20% close rate. We don't necessarily measure it, and we'll get into, particularly because our sales is something we need to hire somebody for and improve it. But anyways, we won't go too deep into that. Close rate, I think, is important. Average deal size, this is something we do measure. And it's really important because it can help you forecast certain things, and you just helps you set your pricing standards appropriately. So average deal size mean if the average fee that we charge our clients per month for our services is $3,500+ per month, that's our average deal size. We try to price our services around the average and make sure it continues to go up. Operations, we look at client retention rate. This is just what is the retention rate of the clients we're working with. Client lifetime value. We know this number. Very few people know this number. And I think it is important. There's many different reasons why. I mean, LTVs, quite simply, if you know that you on average retain a client for 12 months and your average fee is $3,000, we have a $36,000 LTV, lifetime value, if you want to call it that, not factoring in referrals or whatever. But sweet, that's really important. I mean, now you know that your average LTV is $36,000. You could probably spend $5,000 to acquire a customer, right? You can better reverse engineer marketing numbers for building a marketing planner, anything like this. And MRR capacity, this is quite simply how much more MRR can we handle given the team that we have, right? So if we're doing $100,000 a month in revenue, our capacity is, let's say, 150. We have $50,000 worth of MRR capacity until we can't sign any more clients. This is important because at scale, rapid scale, you need to proactively hire people, and you don't want to hire them too soon because then your margins are going to get hit really hard and you might go unprofitable. But you don't want to hire them too late because then you're going to be slowing the growth of the business and potentially turning away ideal clients. So MRR capacity is really important. HR, we're measuring talent retention rate. Okay, so how many people stayed with us this year? How many people left Better AMS this year, right? What percentage does that come to, or just how many people? How long does it take us to hire? Time to hire, right? So if we say, hey, today we need to hire an advertising specialist, an Amazon advertising specialist. Okay, sweet. How many days did it take us from the day we decided we need to hire that person? Is it 30 days? Is it 45 days? What's the standard? What does our recruiting system achieve? So time to hire is important, and capacity standards / per person. So this kind of just means, you should have a good pulse on all the different people within your agency and the capacity of their workload that they can handle, and whether they're doing what percentage would be like OTB versus ITB. OTB is working on the business. ITB is working in the business. Client service work is considered ITB in the business work. Improving our training or improving, our software automations. This can be considered OTB work, right? Because we're improving upon the business. We're making the business better. ITB is more kind of like a maintenance type thing where we're providing great results for the clients. That's just kind of maintains the operations. So if we give somebody a lot of OTB work, for example, there's somebody in our company who I'm thinking of who right now is spending a good amount of time building out training in Better AMS for people, just training people from the ground up, learning Amazon advertising, like a fundamental course from A to Z. And because he's spending a good amount of his time there, his MRR capacity and what he can manage in terms of just like the MRR that he manages with the clients, the book of business that he has, is lower because he's spending a good amount of time, building out this training. We can't expect him to manage $30,000 per month worth of clients, retainers, if he's spending half his time building out a really important training project. So capacity standard per person is just really understanding like where everybody is at in the business and, what kind of capacity standards we're setting for them based on where they're working, OTB, ITB. Now, finance / legal. Cash flow, pretty simple. Or just general cash in bank, really, like how much cash on hand do you have? Runway, you can calculate runway in a lot of different ways. The way I like to calculate runway is a bit extreme. If all revenue went to zero and your expenses maintained the same, how much cash would you have to support your current level of expenses on average? And that's not really the typical way of calculating runway by any means, but runway is a good number. You should know like how many months of runway you have based on the cash you have in the bank and the expenses you currently have, and how that number changes as you take on more expenses or, purposely increase your expenses without revenue increasing. So revenue and profit, that's very straightforward, super important. Accounts receivable, accounts payable. Accounts receivable is just if you send an invoice and somebody owes you $10,000, that's considered accounts receivable. You're owed $10,000. And you should know on average how long it's taking for you to get paid. So we have another metric that was average ARD, which is basically how many days it takes on average for us to get 100% paid for any given month. Again, we're sending out our invoices on pretty much the one day of the month. Let's just say it's actually 2, but we're pretty much sending all our invoices for the clients on the 7th of each month. And so we'll know based in our finance dash if it's taking 22 days on average or 7 days on average to get paid, to 100% paid. So accounts payable, this is just, again, like money that you're owing people, outstanding invoices that you have to pay. These are important things that typically an accounting agency will take care of. So again, these are all the different metrics. And only until we start actually measuring the subsystems above can we actually improve them, because if you have no form of measurement, you're going to be constantly just like guessing what's working, what's not working. And now obviously there is scenarios like if you're just starting your agency and you don't even have a marketing department, or maybe you have like one client and you haven't really even formalized a marketing system. It's pretty obvious that you don't need to start measuring your leads per month in the beginning. You just need to build the damn system. And then you can start measuring it. And the measuring for it should be very simple, like a simple Google sheet, and maybe like once a month. You could even do like once a quarter if you're just starting out and you just started your agency. Now, most people in here, everybody in Agency Enlightened isn't just starting their agency. But just a quick example to show you that like if you haven't even built out a department, there's nothing to measure. So these are the following metrics that we look at to keep a gauge on how the system, performs and where we need to focus our energy. And this is a good kind of little graphic, more or less, of everything we just talked about. And it kind of illustrates the bottleneck process. Foundation, I think we mentioned this earlier, but we don't measure market growth or level of competition. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to measure. How much is your market growing? There's probably certain companies that provide information around this, or the level of competition. There's probably certain ways you can measure it, but it's quite difficult to measure such a thing. But those two things are actually important, and they do determine, the opportunity you have to scale. If you're in a super micro market, I mean, your pipeline can only get so much water. Like, you can only generate so much profit, right? If you're helping, like, trying to think of like a super unique example, let's just go local. If you're helping like females over 35 or pregnant mothers that are over 35 years old in like this one specific city in the world, you probably won't be able to build a business that does $10 million a year. It'll probably be very difficult, especially if the city only has like 500,000 people or 1 million people, right? If your market is really, really, really tiny, that obviously limits how much profit you can make and how big you can grow your business. So the foundation is a very important piece and element, and there are scenarios where typically this is found early on in the growth of an agency that you may have to pivot your market that you're targeting or the service that you're offering. Okay, and that's service market fit, really. But this is a great illustration, and this is another illustration that you're already familiar with. But this is just a really high level like overview of kind of just Polaris star for each of the different sectors. Foundation, service market fit. Marketing, you want more discovery calls. Sales, you want more clients signed. Operations, productized service. HR, scale the company without you. The company can grow without you and run without you. Finance, healthy margins and runway. Really, this is your Polaris star across all the different sectors to give you complete clarity. So, by the way, this slide is the same as the previous slide that you may have seen in previous module in the program. Let's talk about improving systems. This is super important. And the first thing is, let's talk about optimizing. So maximization, this is something you can do to improve a system, and it's the process of maximizing the output of a system. It's one of the most common concepts. Most people default to this. Maximization just focuses on the system's throughput, and optimizing for measurable results like number of MRR gained or number of qualified leads or profit, right? You want to maximize the output. So if your goal is to maximize profit, sweet. You want to take your profit, let's say it's at $10,000 a month, to the utmost you can possibly take it. That's the process of maximization. Then there's minimization, which minimization is really when it focuses on in-process inputs that are basically required for the system to operate, and you're minimizing the expenses to optimize for our margins. That's an example. So you're not actually necessarily changing any of the inputs. You're not actually like increasing any of the inputs. What you're doing is you're just trying to get less of input X to produce more of output Y. That's really what it is. Again, I'll repeat that one more time. Minimization is basically about looking at a system, looking at the efficiency of it, and trying to get less of input X to produce more of output Y. So if you run like ads on Facebook or something, let's say you're spending $10,000 a month and your ROAS is 2, minimization would be, okay, I want to spend half as much and get an even higher ROAS, right? Like I want to spend half of what I'm currently spending on my advertising and get more sales out of it. That's minimization, because you're trying to reduce the input. Maximization is like, well, you could increase the ad spend and produce much more profit within your target ROAS, right? So that's optimizing. And let's talk about refactoring. This is where you basically modify an existing system to make it easier to understand, maintain, and modify without changing the output. So in essence, we're making it more reliable, like simpler and easier to understand. The benefits of this is pretty straightforward. It's basically what I just said. It's to make a system easier to understand, maintain, and modify. This is a concept that actually comes from the programming world, and it's important because if a developer creates a program, and let's say it's 100 lines of code, and it's extremely complex for any other developer to understand that code, this is a liability to the company. And the code should be, rewritten so it's easier to understand, maintain, and modify by somebody else. In essence, what we're talking about for the agency in this example would be like better documentation of your systems and processes, and making that documentation easy and accessible to anybody, right? If you don't have any documentation, or you have some documentation, but it's so complicated that nobody could ever understand or maintain it, this is a huge reliability, and it's basically decreasing the reliability of your system, and that's not ideal. So again, refactoring, it doesn't change the output. It doesn't even really change the input. It just makes the system better structured and easier to understand, simpler, easier to understand, and easier to modify. Makes your system more reliable. Okay, we're going to talk about. We're going to show an example of this here, which is when I went out not too long ago. I dug deep into recruiting, building a recruiting system within Better AMS. And the system itself was the first like V1 of the system was literally a 40-minute Loom video explaining to a virtual assistant how to vet and find candidates, because one of the most time-consuming things about hiring great talent is just finding great talent. And so that's something that I didn't want to do, and I wanted to outsource to a virtual assistant. And so it's the core part of the system for recruiting anyways. And so I made this 40-minute long Loom video, and that was really the system. There was no documentation. There was really not a whole lot going on aside from just a video of me doing it and like a sheet. And I sent it to one of our virtual assistants for him to run, and so that he could be able to find better talent. Now, this is an example of something that is certainly not easy to understand or maintain or modify. If I were to die, it'd be extremely difficult for anybody in the company to figure out, okay, like how does this system work, let alone find this Loom video that's not organized in any specific folder. And it's also difficult to consume the information. You have to literally watch the whole thing for 40 minutes. It's not simple at all. It shouldn't take you 40 minutes to explain a concept for finding talent. But it was an MVP. Okay, and then eventually we refactored the system and made the V2, which was built in Notion in like a one-pager document, and the whole system was pretty much in written text. There was a few videos in the document, but those videos were like 2 to 3 minutes, and they explained the whole context of the system and the importance of how, and the importance of it and how it works. and anybody in the company could easily find this system. So if I died, again, it'd be way easier to understand, way easier to modify, right? Because you can't modify a 40-minute Loom video. Like, you have to re-record the whole thing. So it's just time consuming. So refactoring is a beautiful thing. It just makes your systems easier to understand, modify, increases the reliability of your system, of your business, and makes it a lot easier to pivot when environmental factors impact you. Okay. Now, friction. Let me just take a quick drink of water. So friction is any force or process that removes energy from a system over time, making it less efficient. Amazon is a legendary example of how frictionless experience their checkout experience is, and how it drastically can increase the profit and sales for their business. They have this thing called the one-click checkout, and it basically allows you to look at a product and then just click one-click, checkout, and it'll automatically buy it and ship it to you. You don't have to like enter in your information, choose your credit card. No. It's like you set up your account and then you have the ability to do this one-click checkout. And that is an example of reducing friction for the buying process for the customer, right? It's making it easier for them to buy a product. Another example of friction is like if you go to a grocery store, the products that are shelved in the middle of the shelves, and it's really easy for you to not only see but grab off of the shelf, has much less friction. All brands that have their products in grocery stores want to have it on the perfect aisle. I don't know, like it's just, middle of the shelf, basically perfect eye level, and it's reachable. They don't want to be on the bottom of the shelf, and they don't want to be on the top of the shelf because it's harder to reach, it's harder to see. So it creates more friction for the customer in the grocery store to find and purchase that product, right? These are examples of friction. And the more you can remove friction, the more efficient a system will be, and it'll, increase the output. Okay. So this is an important concept. And ESAD, I used to call it EAD, but ESAD is when you identify friction in a system, you can use this framework, and it's basically 4 things. So eliminate, simplify, automate, delegate. And it's probably one of the most legendary mental models that will serve you for optimizing a system for greater efficiency. When you're looking at a system and let's say you identify some friction, or maybe you don't even identify some friction, but you're just looking at a system and wondering how you can make it more efficient. The first thing you want to ask yourself is it possible to eliminate a step or process in this system? Or can you eliminate the system entirely? Right? And then if you can't eliminate that step or the process of the system entirely, and it's actually important to the business, then the next thing you'd ask yourself is it possible for me to simplify this step or process? And if you can't simplify it, great. You move on to the next thing. If you can simplify it, then you should simplify it. And then you go to number 3, which is it possible to automate this step or process, right? So is there a piece of automation you can use or build to automate this and make it like one click done, right? And then if you can't automate it, or let's say you can automate it, sweet. If you can automate it, then you're done. There's nothing else to be done here. And then if you can't automate it, you'd move on to step 4, which is it possible to delegate this step or process? And who can I delegate it to? This is something that's constantly going through my mind when I'm looking at things that I'm doing, and it's helping me constantly be able to work on more and more higher value things. So, like I said, it's important to know the order and follow the order of the following steps, because you do need to go from like number 1 to number 4 in that order. It wouldn't make any sense if you started with number 4 and went your way up to number 1. Right? I think it's pretty self-explanatory why that is. So this is a really legendary mental model. Here's another good quote by our boy Peter Drucker. There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. This is a good example of why we ask, is it possible to eliminate this step or process? Because it's so easy to just build a process, and then the process works that way for 4 years and nobody changes it, nobody questions it, nobody asks why is it being done this way, and they just accept it. And that's a very common thing that I even am subject to myself. Another good example is what Bill Gates said when he said the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. A good example of this is like, Toyota, when they have these massive recalls. and they have to recall like all these, vehicles, like the Toyota Prius, I think, is a car example where there's been tons of recalls. Many, automobile manufacturers have this problem where there was an issue in their automation of the creation of the car, and one bolt was put incorrectly in, and so then like that bolt causes all sorts of problems where the steering wheel gives out, and the people start crashing the cars, and people are, start suing the company because people are dying or getting extremely injured, and it's a terrible thing. That's an example of, automation applied to an inefficient or broken operation, magnifying the inefficiency. And it's extremely expensive for these companies to do these recalls. So a standard operating procedure, this is another really good mental model to use for building systems. Pretty straightforward. Everybody should know what this is. It's a predefined process used to complete a task or resolve a common issue. The benefits of this is that it really reduces friction, it minimizes willpower, and it's faster for training new hires. It just makes your business more resilient in general. Like if a key person quits, you have documentation on how they did their job, and you can hand that over to the next person that you hire. So all of our Better AMS, SOPs now live within our company wiki. We use a tool called Notion.so, and we'll talk more about this tool later. Prior to this, we used Google Docs or Google Drive, G Suite, and G Suite's great, but like we just reached a level of scale where we felt like, okay, we want a better search function and a better UI for organizing everything. Google Docs, G Suite doesn't really allow you to organize things in a manner that you're seeing in this screenshot. Okay, so let me actually give you a real example here of just an example of an SOP. So if we come into the new hire onboarding section, if you're like joining Better AMS and you're an advertising specialist, let's say your name is John, and we have an account executive template here for you. We also have Elon Musk supporting Doge. So this is a good example of an SOP, right? We have all these different, checklists and things that need to be done and gone through and explained to them. So somebody's going to onboard them, or there's going to be a video that they go through here that's going to explain these things. Now, I don't want to scroll down through all of it because there's some passwords and logins and different stuff, but you get the gist. It's a checklist. It's a process. It makes sure that you don't forget anything, right? There's so many things that you just have to do over and over and over when you hire somebody, especially if it's for the same role. And eventually, it's going to get so annoying because you're going to have to like, what is it? Did I miss something? Did I miss something? Did I miss something? So you just need to put it down into an SOP, into a checklist like this. So that's a good example of an SOP within Better AMS. Now, let's apply everything we just learned into like a real business case. Look at this business here. Their marketing is producing 4 qualified leads per month. Their sales team or person is closing at 25% close rate, and the average deal size is $3,000 a month. They are currently doing $100,000 a month in revenue. They have an 88% annual retention rate of their clients, and the average MRR that they lose per month is about $2,000 due to client churn. They have 100% talent retention rate, which is unbelievably high. Probably could have lowered that. Their time to hire is 45 days. So, and their MRR capacity right now is $50,000. So they can sign $50,000 worth of new MRR / clients before they need to hire another person. Their cash flow, they have $500,000 in the bank. They got that equates to about 12 months of runway for them right now. And their MRR, like I said, is $100,000. They have profit margins of 25%. Okay, sweet. Where's the bottleneck? Feel free to pause this video. I'm about to reveal it in like 2 seconds. But look at this. And just in looking at these numbers, you can quickly, in like a couple minutes, identify where the bottleneck is in this business. Okay, so if you want to pause this video, do it now. If you want to try to figure it out on your own. But the bottleneck is here. And it's pretty straightforward because we see that they're losing about $2,000 per month worth of clients, and they're signing about $3,000 per month right now. So they're gaining about $1,000 per month worth of MRR, and that'll take 50 months for them to reach their MRR capacity, right? So again, numbers, they're never static. They never maintain. But if you were measuring all these different things in your agency, you could quickly look at, okay, where's the bottleneck right now? And you could identify it because you have these metrics to guide you. And so right now they're only gaining $1,000 per month worth of positive MRR. So next month they do 101,000. The next month they do 102, assuming this stayed steady, which it never does stay steady. But they need more leads. Very simply. Well, 4 leads a month just isn't enough. Their close rate's decent. Their average deal size pretty good. They could work on their retention rate so they're not losing $2,000 a month every month. But really, $2,000 a month isn't a whole lot. And what would be much more beneficial for them is if they just doubled their lead inflow, because then they'd be able to, or doubled their close rate. So you could actually argue that they could improve their close rate from 25% to 50%, but 50% is pretty damn high and almost somewhat unrealistic. And 4 leads per month is really not a lot. And so if they just say went from 4 leads to 12 leads and their close rate didn't change, they would be gaining $9,000 per month worth of MRR, minus $2,000, we're talking about $7,000 per month worth of MRR. And after about 5 months, they would have about 30-ish, in the mid 30s per worth of additional MRR. So they'd be sitting like 135-ish thousand MRR after about 5-ish months. And they would probably need to hire around that time because, their time to hire is 45 days and they'd be close to their MRR capacity. And then the bottleneck shifts from marketing to maybe something else. Maybe it's HR, maybe it's sales, it's always shifting because as you sign more clients, your churn is going to change. Maybe their churn goes up, maybe it goes down, or maybe somebody leaves the company and their talent retention rate changes from 100% to 80% or something like this. Things are always changing and bottlenecks are always shifting due to environmental factors. Okay, but this is a good example of how these metrics can be very valuable to you in your agency to guide you to find your bottlenecks. So another real example, like let's say that, okay, I'm the owner of this agency, or you're the owner of this agency, and you're like, okay, I need to improve my marketing. The throughput of my marketing is 4 leads per month. That's just not high enough. We need to like triple that. Now we need to zoom into the marketing system, right? So what are you actually doing for marketing? What is generating these 4 leads per month? Let's say it's an inbound marketing system that you're running. And this is really the only system you're running to generate leads. So you know that the source is coming from this. And you look at your inputs and you say, okay, I'm writing content, I'm posting on LinkedIn, I'm engaging, and I'm doing this every day. And I'm getting 4 leads per month. What needs to change? What inputs need to be changed? What new inputs should be put into this system, or what existing inputs should be removed? What can I change, right? And this is where we really get into like the scientific method. If you're familiar with the scientific method, we'll show it here later in this module. But here is what needs to be added. I only know this because we've actually run this system. There's no prospecting going on. You can't just post every day on LinkedIn and engage with people if you're not trying to connect with new people. You need to constantly be finding your ICPs, your ideal client profiles, connecting with them on LinkedIn or connecting with them on whatever social platform that you're on, or wherever they are. If they're even in person, if they're in your local city, you need to be going to them, connecting with them, getting them into your farm, so to speak, and so that they're actually going to start seeing your content. And so let's say that this person in this case said, oh, you know what? I think I just need to grow my following on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. I need to do more prospecting. Let's say they started doing prospecting. They started connecting with 25 ideal client profiles a day. They hired a virtual assistant to help find these people and then put it into automation that automatically connects with them, or they just manually do it. Now the system's actually going to perform a lot higher because what you were doing before was working, but it was only producing 4 leads a month. And if you start turning on prospecting, you can probably get to 10, 12, 13, 15, 20, etc. Sky's the limit, depending on how many people you connect with, right? So that's a really good example. Now, the more clear you are on the most important KPIs, metrics to measure across all the various different subsystems within your agency, the better your watchtower. I love this analogy. It's just fantastic. The watchtower is really the thing that, when you have all these metrics and you're measuring them, you have your own watchtower, and it helps you see fires before they get too close to you, before they destroy your business, right? Let's imagine this watchtower represents your business. Like, if you don't even have a watchtower, a fire will just come in and take you out. Or you'll never be able to actually grow your business because you don't know what is going on. You just can't see the business as a system, and you can't identify the bottleneck, right? But the watchtower is really like the metrics, right? The metrics is the watchtower because the metrics gives you the power to identify bottlenecks like very quickly, right? Or before they happen sometimes. If you have really good metrics, you can kind of do like cash flow forecasting, maybe 15, 30 days out. And so you can kind of start to see, ooh, you know what? We're not going to have a whole lot of cash in about 15, 30 days. We know this because of XYZ metric here. And because of that, we shouldn't hire this person. And because you didn't hire that person, you're in a better spot and your business grows faster, it doesn't die, etc. Right? Most agency owners, most business owners, they don't do this. They don't have a watchtower because they don't even understand systems thinking. And they don't even have metrics, right? So like, you want to build yourself a big watchtower and make it really nice so that you can see the fires before they come and see them and also just deal with them so that you can build an even better business. So big deep breath here. We've gone through a lot of important information and we learned what a system is. We learned about how systems are everywhere, what an asymmetric action is, a bottleneck, the difference between systems and processes. We learned all about the different systems within an agency, subsystems, and eventually how you go deep enough, those subsystems turn into processes, which are like activities and actions that run the system, that make up the system. And then we went over the importance of measuring your system and how if you can't measure a system, you can't improve it. And all the various different important metrics you should be measuring within your agency. So in everything that we've just learned, you should feel so much more capable of better understanding how your agency actually runs and works as a system. And this will give you and should give you a much more clear perspective of it, which will in turn allow you to better identify asymmetric actions, bottlenecks, and take it to the next level and take your business to the next level. And not only that, but prevent terrible events from taking you out of business. Okay? Let's talk about building systems. So these are some of the key things that you need to think about. Centralize, meaning organize all systems and processes into one easily accessible place. We use Notion.so. We used to use Google Drive, G Suite, Google Docs, Google Sheets, etc. We'll talk more about this in a bit. But it starts with the function, really. The function is where you start with the end goal in mind, right? What is the goal? What is the purpose of this system? Okay. Then you want to get into the components and brain dump the core components of the system and then hypothesize brainstorming, ways in which you can achieve the purpose or function of the system based on the components that you laid out, and then experiment and actually test out what your hypothesis is. And from there, iterate based on the feedback you get from your experiment. Okay, this is really more or less a scientific method, which we're going to also discuss. But I want to go through a real bottleneck that we identified within BetterAMS not too long ago, which was centered around recruiting. And in this example and story that I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go through kind of more or less these key components for building a system. So we identified recruiting was a big bottleneck in BetterAMS. And kind of as a Band-Aid solution, I went out and hired, a freelancer on Upwork who was a recruiter to help us with recruiting. And we saw some success with the first recruiter, but she ended up actually quitting doing recruiting, which was really sad to see. And then we had to hire another person, and that didn't work out. And so we didn't have a good experience working with freelancers, and it wasn't reliable. And so we went and we hired a really expensive recruiting agency. And then, this expensive recruiting agency that specialized in e-commerce that actually had a whole team dedicated to recruiting for the exact type of person that we were looking for, and I was an advertising specialist. And they even worked with some of our competitors in the space. They literally told us we work with these brands. And we're like, wow, those are literally our competitors. And we had a high resonance with them, but it was extremely expensive. It was like 25 or 30% of first year salary, and it took them like 3 months for us to get somebody hired, which is way too long. Turnaround time for hiring somebody cannot be 3 months within our agency. That's absurd. And so we had a poor experience, and a lot of candidates that they sent us also weren't ideal. And so finally, we decided we need to solve this problem ourselves in-house after experiencing tremendous pain trying to outsource recruiting to other people. Now, the function of this system, when I sat down and said, okay, we're going to bring recruiting in-house, we need to build basically our own internal recruiting agency within our agency, right? The core function of this system was we need a less than 30-day turnaround time for hiring an advertising specialist. This is the typical role that we hire for every 2 to 3 months. And so we really needed this to be less than 30 days. The components of this system, again, I brainstormed and thought to myself, what are the core components of a recruiting system? Well, there's sourcing, which is finding the talent, and then there's contacting, which is reaching out to the talent, and then there's interviewing, which is actually, qualifying the talent. You could consider offering a fourth one, but I just consider the offer part of the interview. Then we hypothesized, and so I thought, all right, well, these are the core components. What if we turned Trojan Horse Marketing, which is a outbound marketing system that we've used, into Trojan Horse Recruiting? We did the same thing. We send like personalized Loom videos to these people that we want to hire. It's pretty much the exact same concept of sending like a personalized Loom video to an ideal client, providing some value, except in this case, we're just asking them if they'd consider a new role. And then we experimented, and we sent out 100 Loom videos to 100 ideal, applicants, that people that we would want to hire. And version 1, what happened when we sent out those 100 Looms? We actually hired one person. It was actually the first person we sent a Loom video to. And it happened within less than 30 days, but the outreach was way too time consuming. I knew right away that okay, this is not something that is ideal. Sending these Loom videos is too time consuming. And even if we were to automate the Loom videos with, something similar to Trojan Horse Marketing, where we can automate the video and just have like a virtual assistant offshore do it, I just felt like it's got to be an easier way that's actually more effective. And so we iterated, and I thought to myself, we need something that's more simple and scalable. Let's try something that's so simple and basic. Like, what's the complete opposite of sending a really customized video, right? Sometimes what's good when you want to iterate in a system is invert the current thing that you're doing that is successful or not successful. And so we just inverted, and I decided, I decided that we're going to do, instead of a Loom video, we're going to send a text-based message, and it's going to be so generic and so simple that literally we could send this to anybody. It's not even going to say their name. It's not even going to be customized. So what we're looking at here, though, is the scientific method, really. So we made an observation, right? Our recruiting agency it's not fulfilling the function that we need, and they're not doing a good job, and it's wasting us a lot of time. And we asked ourselves, can we solve this problem in-house? How can we solve the recruiting problem? How can we get a less than 30-day turnaround time for hiring an ad specialist? And then we hypothesized on, how we could actually do that, how we could achieve that function. And then we experimented. We went to the market, and we ran an experiment. We sent out 100 Looms. And then we came to a conclusion and got some results and said, this was good, but we observed, again, that it can be better, and we need to actually make a more efficient process. And then we repeated the process and asked ourselves, how can we make this more efficient? Well, we can change the outreach message from a video into something else. And this gets into V2, but first let's review the system. This is really what it looked like. So when we built the V1, here's the core components. I made a simple training video for a virtual assistant. It was a 40-minute Loom video. We talked about this Loom video earlier in this module. And there was no documentation written. It was just a giant Loom video explaining how to find ideal talent, because that was one of the most time-consuming things. I found out very quickly that finding talent was very time-consuming. And then we needed a talent database. So similar to Trojan Horse Marketing, if you're not familiar with Trojan Horse Marketing because you haven't gone through the module in the marketing sector, it's basically an outbound marketing system. And we needed a talent database that basically allowed us to store the talent in a Google Sheet, right, in a database. So if our virtual assistant found somebody that looked like an ideal hire, they would put their name and their information and their LinkedIn profile into this Google Sheet. Same thing as what we do for Trojan Horse Marketing, except in this case, it's not ideal clients, it's ideal talent. And then we had contacting. So Again, we did Loom videos for the V1 recruiting system, and you'll see this is a real screenshot of the person that the first Loom video we actually sent out, and this guy ended up joining our agency. Amazing hire, super happy with him. Funny enough, it was the first person we sent a Loom video to, so that was pretty exciting. And then the interviewing process, it was just very simple. It's just myself, I do an interview, Alex does an interview, Destiny does an interview. There wasn't really anything needed to be added to this because we already had an existing script or process or system for doing interviewing. So really it was sourcing and contacting that required building for making this recruiting system. Now, again, that was V1, right? And then we went into V2, where, again, like I said, we inverted from something that was highly customized and highly personal from a Loom video to a super simple text-only unique message that could be automatically sent to anybody. And we experimented. We reached out to 224 people. We connected with we reached out to 224 people on LinkedIn. And to message people on LinkedIn, I like to connect with them first, and once we connect, I like to actually send them a message. Some people will send a message in the connection request. I don't particularly like to do that. We split tested and found that we get a higher connection rate when we don't send a message in the connection request, but I digress. So we connected with 103 people. We got a 46% connection rate with those 224 people that we identified, and then we got 55 responses, which is unbelievably high, okay? And we booked six interviews. So 6% interview rate based on the people we connected with is more or less what it was. And this was actually higher than the V1 system that we did with the Loom videos. I didn't actually have the metrics here, but the response rate was lower. It was probably in the 20% range. And out of the 100 Looms that we sent, we maybe got, I think it was like 3, maybe 4 interviews. Again, I didn't pull the exact numbers for V1 in these slides, but it was much higher for V2, and V2 was much simpler, which was very exciting news to us because it was like, wow, this is so much easier and it's actually performing way better. And then when we got these numbers in, we thought, well, do we need to iterate this? No, not for now, because the throughput is high enough. Like, this is good enough to where we can achieve our goal of the less than 30-day turnaround time. So sweet, we built the system, and it's not like it was done overnight. It took a couple months and or like a month. And from here, this is actually just a quick screenshot of the performance. You see we have 260 leads, 224 got actual invites, 103 connected. That's where the 46% connection rate comes from. And then we had 55 responses. And this is the actual message that we sent out to people. So instead of sending a Loom video, we just said, hi, friend, love your past experience. Do you happen to know anyone who's open-minded to a new role opportunity? We're looking for Amazon ad specialists, and I'll drop a role description below. There's also a secret Easter egg. And then we dropped a link to the Amazon advertising specialist role description. And that was it. We actually had a follow-up message that showed up. I think it was like 3 days later. If they didn't respond, I would just say, if not, no worries, with a little hands up emoji, just as a quick follow-up, because sometimes people read the message, it's late at night, and then they just, forget to respond. So that was the message that we crafted and we sent out. And so what changed in the system? Well, we changed a few things in V2. We improved our training. So we actually, instead of making a 42-minute Loom video, I redid the sourcing training for finding talent and put it into Notion. So that's a bit of system refactoring for anybody who remembers what we were just talking about like 10 minutes ago. And then what else did we do? We built we obviously changed the outreach message from a Loom video to a simple text-based message. That was the major change. That was again, maximization. What that was basically. Also a little bit of minimization, but we optimized the system to produce a much greater output, which was fantastic, and we simplified it, which is just amazing. And then we also built a quick talent pipeline in Asana, which is our project management tool, just because we started getting a lot more applicants, and it was getting getting very difficult to track everything just by hand on a piece of paper. So we built a simple talent pipeline so that we could know like which stage each applicant was in as they were going through the hiring process. Pretty simple stuff. And then we also built a talent evaluation database, which basically just helped us score each applicant from like 1 to 10 in various different parts, like leadership or EQ, IQ, Amazon advertising experience. Actually, we don't measure IQ, culture fit, and various different things. This stuff will be more covered in the HR sector of Agency Enlightened if you're wanting to go more deep into like talent pipeline, talent evaluation stuff, and how we interview. So, yeah, this is really what changed in the V2. And so what we just went through there was a high-level overview of what we were just talking about, right? So we were just talking about how you should, start with the function. What's the end goal of this system that you want to build or improve upon? What are the components within this system? That's a key kind of step, because you want to think, okay, what are the current components or missing components? And then hypothesize, brainstorm ways in which you can achieve the purpose, experiment, iterate, right? We literally did all of this. And this is also similar to like this in itself. Everything that we are looking at is this. It's the system, right? We have inputs, transformation, outputs, feedback, right? And we have an environment. So we shifted the inputs from V1 based on the feedback we got from the V1 recruiting system. We shifted the inputs and we got a greater output. And again, so all of this stuff is very much connected. And let's go back to where we were. So recruiting V1 looked like this, just so you can see it from a better perspective. So again, when I first went out on this journey of solving the recruiting bottleneck, I sat down and thought to myself, what's the end goal of this system? It's a less than 30-day hiring turnaround time, right? And then I want to think to myself, what are the major components within the system? It's sourcing, contacting, interviewing. And then what are the subsystems within these major components, or within these subsystems, basically, or you could call them components. And we've identified that sourcing training was a very important element. A talent database was going to be important. A virtual assistant, an ideal talent profile, right? This is a description of the person that we want to hire. And then the other components for contacting was a Loom video, Meet Alfred, this is the software we used. And then interviewing, we would just do a simple interview. And then we have metrics for each of these subsystems and components, which is like talent source per day. We had a virtual assistant. They had a specific target. They needed to source at least like 15 people per day, so that we could, get to our less than 30-day hiring turnaround time, etc. So this is what the system looked like and the different measurements. Now, again, it was very obvious that one of the most time-consuming things that we needed to get done was sourcing, which is finding ideal talent, right? And that to actually find ideal talent, the first thing you do is define who it is you're trying to hire. So when I first started building this system, again, I mapped it out kind of like this in my mind. I was like, okay, this is what it's going to look like, more or less, and this is what we're optimizing for. And the first thing I need to start working on is the ITP, the ideal talent profile. This is, again, the profile of who it is that we want to hire. I will show you that right now, just as a quick example. So this was built, and it just goes over all the details that we're looking for in this candidate. We also have some examples of different candidates on LinkedIn, and there's some live vetting training also. So sweet, that was really important, and that was the first thing that was built when building the V1 of our internal recruiting system, right? And then we built the talent database, because once we found the talent, we needed to store it somewhere, and I needed to be able to approve or reject it so that I could give the virtual assistant feedback on how he's doing sourcing talent. So we went out and built a talent database. It looks just like you're seeing it here on the slide, right? The date the person found it, the LinkedIn profile, the full name, and the status, whether I approve it or reject it, and the type of role. So that was built. Sweet. Now we needed the training, right? We had the ITP, we had the talent database. Now I needed to build the system or the training for finding the talent and train it to our virtual assistant. And this is pretty straightforward. I mean, like, I just went out and did it myself, figured out like, okay, LinkedIn is one of the best platforms that you can use to find talent. And we used LinkedIn and Google. And so I built a training system where I basically taught our virtual assistant how to find talent pools. Talent pools are basically just companies that look similar to ours that contain talent that we're looking for that fit our ideal talent profile. So talent pools are basically companies that contain the talent that we want to hire. And so I trained my virtual assistant on how to find talent pools, and then obviously how to identify ideal talent within those talent pools so that they could put it in the Google Sheet, the database that we built. And they were able to find like 10 to 15 people per day, which was good enough for us to get this recruiting system started. Okay, so done. I had the training, I had the VA trained, we had the talent database, we had the ITP, and this is a Slack channel that we created called, it was originally just called Trojan Horse Marketing, but then we added THR, Trojan Horse Recruiting, and voila, we started getting Amazon advertising specialists found. You're going to see the numbers look a lot higher right now. That's because we improved the throughput of our sourcing from like 10 to 15 per day to like 30 plus per day. But anyways, that is V1. These are all the major components. Okay. And so in the V1, now we had all the sourcing stuff done. And it was just a matter of me actually contacting these people and sending out Loom videos, right? And that was really simple. I just came up with a super simple script for how to send a Loom video to somebody. Took me like, I don't know, maybe like 20 minutes. I just thought about, okay, what do I want to send? What do I want to say in this Loom video? It was basically just like, hey friend, love your profile. Or like, hey John, hey Sarah, love your profile. I just came across it on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're open to a new role opportunity, but we're hiring for somebody who's just like you. And here's I'm going to send you a quick role description link in the DM. That was pretty much what it was. Okay. And then after we contacted them, if they booked a call with us, or they responded and they were interested, I'd get them on an interview and we would interview them. Basically, that was the process. It was a very simple process. And then, obviously, when we built that, I realized like, okay, Loom videos is inefficient. We need to iterate. We need to make this better. So that's when we changed up the system to Recruiting V2. I made the sourcing training better. I changed the message to be more simple, and we started using Meet Alfred, which is a tool that we were actually using Meet Alfred in the V1, but it wasn't as needed. But Meet Alfred just automates the outreach process. So all we do is we upload a list of like 500 candidates that we want to reach out to, and it will automatically connect with them and reach out to them after they've connected. We also made the sourcing training better. Let's look at some of these elements. So Meet Alfred is here. A good example of a campaign that we ran. Here's an example of one. If we come into this campaign, you're going to see the first step is to connect with them on LinkedIn. The second step is like 3 days from previous step, send them this message. And then after that, 7 days after that, if they don't respond, then we say like, if not, no worries. Super simple. And so anytime we want to hire somebody, we'll upload like 500 leads or talent profiles into Alfred, send them this script. And we know that typically per every 100 leads, based on our interview call booking rate, we'll get X amount of interviews. And so I'll create a campaign with only so many people that will result in what I think will allow us to hire somebody in less than 30 days. So it's actually a really good system. And then we made the sourcing training better. So instead of having a 42-minute Loom video, I just built the training out in here and wrote it down. Again, writing processes is actually much better than just making a long video. Why? Because it forces you to write down what is most important and use brevity in while you're creating the process. And it's just much easier to skim through and change and modify. You can't modify a video. It's not easy to modify a video and do like video edits and like cut out a certain section and then re-go through and put it in. It's also much easier to identify parts of the training within a process if it's written, because you can have something like this, which is like a table of contents. And so, for example, yeah, you can do something similar to like with videos, like timestamps, but I guess, whatever you prefer. I think it's easier to edit systems, modify processes and systems if you build them in this way. And so I'll have to blur out the LinkedIn Recruiter login, but basically this is the training here, and it goes through everything. Okay, so we built better training, and this better training resulted in increasing our sourcing per day abilities from like 10 to 15 people per day to like 30 plus people per day, which was really, really nice. So I just showed you Alfred. I just showed you our better training. This is from the V2. And now a really important concept that you need to understand is just constant iteration. No system operates within a vacuum. Like the environment is constantly affecting the system, thus frequent iteration should be expected in any system. The throughput of our recruiting system may be sufficient now, but what if we need to hire more people faster because we start closing deals faster? Or all of a sudden we start losing some people because they decide to resign from our agency? What if the market gets more competitive? What if the average salary of our team in our market goes up and we can't afford to pay them the average salary and they're getting DMs from recruiters and so they're taking offers in different companies? There's a million different factors that are constantly changing as the market changes and the world changes, and all of it is affecting the throughput of all of your systems within your agency. Okay, and so constant iteration is to be expected. A real example of this is, again, when we increased our sourcing abilities from 10 to 15 per day to 25 to 35, that was needed because we needed to have a higher throughput. Again, the percentage of people that would book a call and schedule an interview was fluctuating, and we didn't have enough data. And then I realized, it's 10 to 15 people per day isn't enough for us to achieve our less than 30-day turnaround time. We need to triple this or double it. And so that's why it had to go into this particular part of the system. Again, the subsystem, like the recruiting system, and then we have the subsystem, which was sourcing, and increase the throughput of the sourcing capabilities, right? And so this is like something that just naturally occurred due to environmental changes. And then talent pipeline, eventually we had so many applicants, we needed something to track. So the system scales to a throughput that's high enough to where now you need something that wasn't even there before, like a pipeline to manage all the people because you're hiring so many people, right? And talent evaluation, now we're doing so many interviews, and we really need to make sure we're hiring the best people possible. So we need a better way of evaluating talent. This is how systems improve. You run a system and you think, wow, based on all the feedback we've gotten, we could probably improve this, and this. These are the most important things we should improve. Let's improve those. And then, sweet, maybe you move on to the next big bottleneck. So some system building tools, I've mentioned one of these here, Notion. It's like a company wiki tool. This is where we store all of our systems and processes. We also used Lucidchart for some time. We rarely use Lucidchart now. Maybe I'm the only one in the company who probably ever uses it. And it's typically for mapping complex systems or building wireframes. But this is Notion. It's basically like Google Docs. It's just a bunch of it's truly just a company wiki. It's better than Google Docs or G Suite in my opinion because it has a really good search function. So you can find anything really quickly. And just the organization alone, look at this, right? You can't do something like this in G Suite. It just doesn't look as nice in my opinion. It's not as aesthetic. It's not as nice. And so we just store everything in here. We have a team directory with all the information of our different team members, their phone numbers, emergency contact, all this different stuff. Training wiki, new hire onboarding, just anything you can possibly imagine. It's a lot of docs and videos within docs. I love it. I think it's amazing. I don't think it's a necessity unless you have a lot of processes, a lot of systems, and you feel like G Suite is kind of like us, not serving you well enough. It doesn't have a good search function. It's not that aesthetic suite, but G Suite is good enough for almost all businesses, and it's just not as beautiful and easy to organize things. So this is Notion. Lucidchart is a little bit different. It allows you to do stuff like this. And just build out, various different processes in a more visual way. This is not something you can do in Notion. There's many free tools. Lucidchart's a bit expensive. I don't know what it is. I think it's $18 a month or something like this. Maybe less, but anyways, there's totally tons of free options that you can use. But I've just gotten so familiar with this tool and building different things that it's something that we use. So our website wireframe was used in Lucidchart. Wireframing, it's common in Lucidchart. We built our culture canvas in Lucidchart. There's just certain things that we'll build in Lucidchart again, but I'm typically the only one who uses it. And I wouldn't say that you even need it because there's many that are, there's many free wireframing tools that you can find. So that is Notion and Lucidchart. Two tools I would recommend. if you like to go a little bit further and get something better than G Suite, or you want a bit better diagramming, wireframing software, then I think Google does have a free option similar to Lucidchart, but it's not as nice. So here's your action items. There's a worksheet. Download and complete the systems thinking worksheet. This is a very straightforward, easy worksheet. Within this worksheet, this is it right here. You'll see it in the action item section below. But within this worksheet, there's a quick training video. It's actually, I think it's like a couple minutes long, not 2 minutes. And that will walk you through it. So just watch that quick training video, and then you'll be able to complete these things. But basically what's in it is we have a PDF which contains the following slides. These are some of the most important slides. You may already have these two from a previous module in the training program. This is slightly updated from the previous module since we made this module a little bit later. But overall, the concept's the same. And so I love these. These are so important to me. I'll look at these every now and then if I'm feeling lost in the business and I really need to just zoom out and get perspective. I will look at this to get a really high level picture, and this to get a good idea of what we're measuring, where we're at. And then this is just also part of the PDFs, and it's part of actually the worksheet, which you'll see in the worksheet. Also just kind of helps you understand like just high level visual of the overall system and the subsystems, processes, metrics. And then of course, systems theory. This is a nice little graphic that, again, in my opinion, just zoom out occasionally. If I'm ever feeling lost, I can just zoom out, look at this, think, okay, if I'm just find the biggest bottleneck, identify the system, identify the inputs, shuffle the inputs until we improve the throughput. And then we have an improving system slide for printout. Again, all of this is located within the worksheet, and it's one PDF, and you can print this out or have this on your computer saved somewhere so that, again, if you're ever wondering, how do I improve the system? What are the different things I can do? You can reference to this. So lastly, we have the building systems sheet. This is good just if you're wondering, like, okay, I'm about to build this system. How should I go about building this? It's good to have a framework for when you're about to build a big system or go and do something. This is typically what I'll follow, and it's really helped me to be able to get in the flow, like, deep work, flow state, and build a system much faster and much better, frankly, because this is just a good method for going about it. It's typically, if you don't have a framework, you'll just kind of approach it differently every time, and it'll be sometimes chaotic, and you'll waste a lot of time and energy. So, ladies and gents, I'm so excited for you because, at least for me, understanding systems thinking, wow, it has just really allowed me to see my agency, the business, any business so clearly. And once you see it in this way, you never go back, and you always feel like you have a good grasp on what needs to be done. And it truly brings you a lot of peace of mind because most business owners, again, they don't have this kind of knowledge. They don't understand or see their business through a systems thinking lens, right? And if you can't see your business as a system and you don't understand systems thinking, you don't see your business that way, I mean, how can you improve it? It's very difficult because, again, if you don't understand a system, you can't improve it. That's why systems thinking is such a legendary concept to understand, right? So it's one of the most frustrating things ever if you don't understand systems thinking because you don't understand the system that well, and therefore you won't be working on the most important asymmetric actions or biggest bottlenecks. So I hope you've really enjoyed this module. For me, this was just an absolute pleasure building it and recording it for you. So that, ladies and gents, is all. Much love. Let's get to work. Let's complete the action item, move forward in the program. And if you have any questions, of course, you can come on one of the coaching calls. All right. Much love, guys. Ciao.